what is your thought then about having this kind of organization from the perspective of the residents, so from your country, from Thailand and Philippines? Perhaps I will start with Kavi.
Okay. First of all, I almost cried because it took another 20 years to come to this moment. To tell you, it was transpired 2 decades ago. It was an exceptional experience indeed, and luckily I lived long enough to come here today. Thank you very much, and it was very happy to see old friends here. You know, I'm really happy. Now, it all started, I have a little story to tell. In 1988, on the 6th of February, I was kicked out by Hun Sen, the same Hun Sen that is ruling Cambodia now. I was very young, I was a rookie journalist. I wrote a story about his brother, corruption in Kampong Chan. So it was a big story. I called one of his close aides, and I wrote it. Whatever I have written at that time under the brand of The Nation, and at that time the former editors, also my colleagues here, classmate, Thep Chayong. So the story came out. Whenever there was story reported from me, because I was stationed, a young journalist stationed in Phnom Penh at the time, the Khmer Rouge is still fighting the Heng Samrin government. So whenever the story came out, Voice of America, Khmer language, will pick up the story and translate it for broadcast at 9 o'clock every day. So on that day, February 6th, my story came out in the morning. At 9:30, 7 soldiers came to my house. My house is a whole building that I rent for $150 near the Central Market at the time, because you can have the whole block of apartments without any light. So they came and they said that they want to look at my computer. Well, at that time, computer is not very sophisticated. I said no. He said that you have to leave the country. And in fact, I left the country the next morning with David Jenkins of ABC, who was there to report on the Khmer Rouge. Now, after I was kicked out on that day, I arrived in Ho Chi Minh, and suddenly I got a call from Committee to Protect Journalists, New York, and Cooper. Ann Cooper became very well-known journalist and who wrote a Broadway show about 9/11. Ann Cooper, she was the executive director of Committee to Protect Journalists. That was why she called me and said, "Are you Mr. Kavi? I worried about you." I said, "Who are you? I don't even know you. We are from Committee to Protect Journalists." I was impressed. I said, "How could this happen?" My office didn't care about me. "Oh, Mr. Kavi was kicked out. Oh, great. We don't have to pay him another $150 for the rent." So it occurred in my mind. At that time, any violation of media freedoms to fight against journalists in the region is always the work of Committee to Protect Journalists, the Vienna-based Institute of Press, and then you have also Paris Reporter Without Frontiers. So all these organizations, regional organizations, have never defended our own journalists in the region. So it took another 10 years before it became a reality. But in 1992, I was fortunate enough, because I was writing in English, so I have a lot of relation with foreign journalists. So I came to know some of the journalists who wanted to set up IFEX. IFEX was created in Montreal in 1992. I was one of the founders, but I represent the Thai Journalists Association at the time. So I was the one of the very few Thai journalists who I've been writing in English. By the way, I've been writing my column for 37 years, so my nickname is a dinosaur, okay? So I've been writing for so long, and I'm writing not 140 words, I'm writing 890 words, so it's a long one, so a lot of people could not handle my article. So that's what happened. And then suddenly I was invited to go to APEC. That's where Lynn Newman, Lucas, Melinda were there, because we represent the journalists from Southeast Asia who will give all these NGO at the APEC meetings, because always APEC meeting have a platform for NGO to address all kinds of issues. So I was invited to speak on the situation in Southeast Asia. So in my prepared speech, I said that it's about time that we have a regional organization to protect our own journalists in our region. So the idea, Lynn Newman was there, so he picked it up and he invited all this, including Melinda, because I did not know Lynn Newman. Lynn Newman was one of good friends of Melinda and Sheila Colonel and Andre Hassono, because at the time I was from Bangkok. Lynn Newman was a former correspondent in the Philippines. Yeah, so that much was my contribution. And since Lynn Newman sit down, I remember he said that I could get you $5,000 to have the first meeting. I think now Melinda will probably have a better collection than me from that meeting.
The woman remembers more, right? The woman never lets forget. Actually, we were sitting around complaining about life, as journalists tend to do. I actually didn't even sit through your speech inside. We were hanging out, exchanging battle stories. We were visited by the Committee to Protect Journalists in Manila, asking questions about the killings in Manila and making presumptions about the context. And I said, they're not getting it all right. It is not a policy, it is out of the endemic violence that is going on in the Philippines. They're not getting that context right. And from that end, as I moved away from mainstream journalism, I felt that the story of the violence against journalists had to be told from our eyes, from those who were working on the ground. And so in Vancouver, where we were all invited to be thinking about APEC, we were thinking about other things as usual. And in this conversation, one, we complained about the fact that we had to read about ASEAN news or Southeast Asian news from the Western press. That was one complaint. The second complaint was, why are all our problems, the problems, being taken over and discussed by those who are outside of our countries? And so in this discussion, Lynn, who was looking for some exciting reason to go back to Asia, actually, as a subtext to why he was so excited about this possibility. He was with CPJ, he was the Asian correspondent for reporting on the violence against the press. And therefore, it was a confluence on his part to basically say, I think I can raise the money to get this started. And we had this wonderful first meeting, which was a seminar on reporting on attacks and threats against the press. And all of a sudden, it just gelled. And there were these 6 people who represented the countries. We even had a little bit of a number. Lucas said, you know, it's 6 years, 6 years, 6 years. 1986, the Philippines threw out Marcos. 6 years later, Thailand shifted away from the military junta, or they threw out the military junta. And 6 years later, Jakarta declared their victory over the old guard, over the old political order. And because of that euphoria, I think, about what was happening in the region, we all felt that it could be done. We can do this. It was a kind of coming of age, actually, and that's how I wrote about it when I reported on that event. It was basically Southeast Asians getting together with their counterparts and basically saying, do you think we can do this? And we said, why not? And so with the cheering, actually, of all the other people who had attended that event, it was a feeling of, hey, we can't fail. We can do this, and we will work together to do it.
Perhaps some of the fond memories.
I'm only thinking more that we had so much fun, that we became good friends, that we could talk about the problems as though his problem is my problem. The problem in Thailand is all our problem. It was really a confluence, I think, of the sense that there is in this region a possibility that we had never thought of before. And so the kind of feeling that you are giving birth to something, I mean, all of us together were fathers and mothers of a particular movement. And that overcame all the fears. In fact, it was much, much later when I got interviewed and said, didn't you have cultural quarrels? Didn't you have feelings of, not understanding each other? And at that point, I don't know about you, Kavi, but I didn't ever feel that way. It was always each time, hey, the next problem is this, or we need to work more about this. And everybody kind of jumped in. In a sense, how do you explain that? Perhaps it was the momentum and the context of what was happening in Southeast Asia then.
Well, SEAPA has 2 mothers and 3 fathers,
True.
in nutshell. But I think it's the conference of the same experience. That's explained why journalists from the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia got together, and they were connected right away. So it was very quick. And Lynn Newman could get the money right away. That is why less than a year we were able to form this organization. And it was the time, and Lucas probably could recall, we were so ambitious that we should not have only one quarter, one head office. We set up in Jakarta too, because our idea is that Thailand and the Philippines at the time was like at the head of all Southeast Asian countries, both in terms of freedoms and in terms of the qualities of journalism, particularly investigative reports. That is why one important development is that regional journalists like Thai Journalists Association has recognized the expertise of our Filipino friends. So we learned the skill of investigative reports from the Philippines. So later on, this kind of learning process lead to intensive workshop of investigative report, which used to be taught by journalists from America, from the European. So it's all started, as you can see, for years since SEAPA, all the expertise mainly come from Philippines, come from Indonesia, and also Thailand. Now together they form a team on many occasions, and they can share the experience. Sometimes they go to Africa. That I recall.
I think there were also certain strengths that were brought to the table that made it a really collegial thing. For example, in Thailand, the Strong Thai Association was a model that we thought could be presented to all the other different countries, that you could get together an association that worked on the issues of the press, not just the industry, not just what the owner's interests were. That was one. In the activism that the AGI and the groups of ISAI were also shared in the sense that they, one, were activists turned journalists, and so that kind of like drive was also something that was different. ISAI had entrepreneurial activities. They actually had a lot of money to begin with because they developed radio stations that could actually be sustainable, and all of these things that we brought to the table, I think we welcomed that there was so much strength that had already been developed in the 3 countries. And then when Malaysia Kini came up, it was something that we all embraced and basically said, hey, if they're going to get into trouble, then we're going to put out a helping hand. And that had its costs as well.
Yeah, a break with road. Smiling, yes.
Yeah, actually, Malaysia we would like to call them like sister organization with SEAPA, because Malaysia was founded the next year after SEAPA. So yeah, it's well said. I was wondering, what you foresee SEAPA then and now? Is it different? Because it seems to me that the really strong foundation of SEAPA lies in the fact that each member can complement each other and perfect each other. Now that the region has changed with all the new media landscape, new people come in, this is what you anticipate then. And my question is, this is SEAPA what you would like to see?
Definitely the growth of SEAPA, yes. That we would have members, more members in the different countries in Southeast Asia. That was always an objective. It was difficult to reach out to the restricted countries. And yet, even though that was difficult, we were able to hold all kinds of events in Cambodia, all kinds of events in countries where people would not have expected. The outreach among the countries went on. We were kept rather busy by the events that had been, or activities or projects that had been set up. So, is this what we foresaw at this point? Not the difficulties. I always thought that it would be a long haul before a free press would be able to present to the societies in which they operate that we are going to be part of the development and the accountability. And I always felt that would be a problem. We probably did not anticipate how difficult that would be, and that the change in the landscape would happen so quickly within the 20 years.
Well, I'm pretty happy with SEAPA for the last 2 decades in protecting press freedom. But I would like to see more in the future, because the other ways to protect journalists, other than go out, fight against dictator, unfair, unjust law and practices, the other best protection is to improve the quality and professionalism of journalists so that we are not vulnerable for attack. The reason why journalists are vulnerable because their writings are not high qualities. Even today in Thailand, I would say that our report is not high quality. We need to check fact, especially at this particular moment. I listen to the ambassador, I listen to Ajahn. Journalist has to be more than professor. If you count ambassador mention of the globalized issue, global issue, and rap that Ajahn Vitit, you must have 12 PhDs. I'm serious. You are not a journalist writing about basic issue, comment on the same thing. Everything's related. How can you write about issue in the South without knowing your neighboring country, without knowing Muslim world? You're writing about China, you don't know about Japan. So it's all interconnectedness. So I think the qualities of journalism, their high level of professionalism, is the best protection. Certainly, at the moment, SEAPA is worried about to protect the rights of press freedom and all that. That is very good. But I think we must keep in mind also that we must make ourselves less vulnerable. Why? Because this is the factor you can control, you can direct, you can change. You cannot tell us this government said, don't do this, don't do that. But we know we have to be highly professional. Even as the most restrained condition, I think that would need creativities, that would need high professionalism to write. Not only in English. English has no leeway. I mean, for example, I've been writing for 37 years, but also writing in Thai. Because writing in Thai, Thai journalists feel very comfortable. Comfortable because they think that they can write anything they want. No, I think you can write anything you want, but go through very careful, rational thinking based on observing facts and whatever that you think will make your report, your view credible. And I think this is what I would like to see. Of course, SEAPA, at the beginning, you know, we have listed so many things. We like to be like CPJ, we like to document every violation of human rights. At the moment, we still could not do it very well. Number two, we will launch a protest against all the Southeast Asian government. We have not done that every time. The first statement was launched in Thailand under the most democratic government, because at that time, I was so sensitive at the time. I was the president of Thai Journalists Association. The secretary of the Prime Minister intimidated our journalists, intimidated by word and just by, you know, some insulting. We were so mad, so we protest to the Prime Minister. And you look at this current situation, it's a whole different world. So I think the situation at the moment, as a journalist, you have to be really good and you have to be creative.
I think we have to be more than just good. I think we have to review the news conventions. The news conventions have drawn us to report only on the power centers. We have lost touch with the connections of what we do has a connection with the rest of the community, of the rest of society. We have lost connections with what really matters with the people. And that's why I think so many of the leaders that are here have been able to push buttons and basically say, don't listen to the media, because they are the creatures of the oligarchs, the business empires, whatever, etc. I think we have come upon a time where we need to rethink, basically, what our business is about, what the news should really be about. And this takes you back to the drawing boards, being good and being good with the technology that is now here, and being good and being connected with the people, and so that what we do will matter to the lives that they live. I think that connection is lost with most of the way journalists work. And until we realize that, we will always be vulnerable. It is unfinished work all the time. We say democracy is always a working model all the time, a work in progress. I think journalism should be the same, because we are hand in glove in the growth of democratic development.
So this is the last question. Given all the wish list you said that this is the list that SEAPA as a regional organization need to fulfill, what do you think is the most challenge of SEAPA as an organization to fulfill in order to overcome all these challenges and wish list you mentioned?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is to make sure that an attack to any journalist in Southeast Asia is an onslaught to all. And if you create that kind of sentiment and solidarity, that's the only way to save press freedom in the region.
It's basically the same. We lack solidarity. We lack solidarity of the institution itself. That if it's only one institution that is called out by the president, as he has done to 3 institutions, all the other business media companies are not bothered because they have not yet been attacked. And so there is no institutional solidarity as well. So if that doesn't happen within the national community, how can it happen across the borders? That is the major challenge.
Thank you very much.